Hey, it's Webs here, and the patch notes for 23.2 for Hearthstone have been revealed. There is a bunch of information here for Battlegrounds, but since I don't really cover Battlegrounds on this channel, I'm not going to go over this. I'm going to focus on the huge mercenary updates, some of which will change the game mode forever, and the new mercenary event that is actually starting out tomorrow. The first general change is Vanessa, Leroy Jenkins, and their respective portraits are now available through normal means. This is pretty good for those players who missed out on either the Leroy event or the battle pass that existed for Vanessa. The next thing, which is a huge change and a real big shock that they're actually doing something like this, in PvP they're introducing fatigue, similar to what we have in other game modes, where this is going to start after 10 turns of combat, and all characters will be in fatigue and take double damage no matter what it is, which also does mean quadruple damage if it is a critical hit. I think this change is probably a good change overall, though it does make me a little bit frustrated. I think it should be maybe 15 turns or 20 turns even, because if it's only going to be 10 turns, there's some builds that are just going to disappear from mercenaries completely, and that's no fun, especially with the current meta that we have right now. I don't want less diversity in our meta, I want more. And this pushes out some mercenaries that aren't really popular as it currently stands, but it does also push out some of the ones that are super popular, such as Sinestra, where you could, in theory, just lose a game normally. Right now, if that's their only mercenary and they can just out-heal your damage, and this should prevent something like that to actually happen, which is a good change for that. But again, some of the slower builds, such as Holy Humans, which aren't doing much right now, as of right now, are probably going to just die off because they lose the one thing that actually made them work. The next rework that we're actually seeing is refresh keyword is being updated. Instead of fully resetting the cooldown of a ability, refresh will now be written as refresh X, reducing the cooldown of an ability by that amount. This doesn't really change too much overall when it comes to some of the refreshing abilities that we have seen with some of the current mercenaries. Manaflox is the main one that I can think of, and we'll be talking about him a little bit later once we look at some of the other reworks that we're actually seeing. And finally, the last thing, which is a really good change for new players, completing all bounties in Winter Spring Zone will now unlock the first bounty of each other zone after it, which is a really good change for new players. It makes it where you don't have to rush to try to get through every single level. There's so many bounties right now that for a new player, this does reduce the overall time investment that you actually need to do some of the new events that they are going to be putting out. And speaking of new events, Nzoth is coming into Mercenaries, and he is one of my favorite Hearthstone characters of all time. I'm so excited to actually see him as a mercenary, and he introduces a new tribe for mercenaries, Old Gods. With his arrival, we have a mercenary update besides this, which is going to be his event, which is going to be 10 tasks like before, where 2 tasks are unlocked on each individual day for the first 5 days of the event. And we have until the next major Hearthstone update to complete all 10 tasks. And another good change after you actually complete each of the tasks is that Toki will actually return before the event actually ends, which is a really nice change for new players and free-to-play players. And it looks like that the Nzoth event is going to be centered around humans, dwarves, elves, and murlocs. That shouldn't really be a big surprise. He is the god of the depths. So it should be interesting to actually see what these tasks are, but sadly it does look like we're not going to get them early, as unlike the previous 2 events, they didn't actually put the event data into the game before the patch actually was launched. So let's go over the new mercenary, Nzoth, who is a legendary caster, who is a old god with 10 attack and 80 HP at max level. His first ability is Spawn of Nzoth. At level 5 is a speed of 5, 15 attack, 15 HP, rush, immune while attacking, pretty decent for a token-based team. The next ability is Gift of the Nzoth, which is 5, speed of 6, give a minion plus 5 attack and gain control of it. It attacks a random enemy. Old God abilities refresh 2. This is a really interesting ability to actually use, and it depends on how this is actually going to work out in the end. If it can actually steal your opponent's mercenaries, that's going to be really, really funny to use. But given how it's worded, I'm assuming it's just going to be other tokens that you can actually steal from your opponent. But given how it's worded, I very much doubt it's going to be able to steal your opponent's mercenaries, and it's just going to be tokens that they actually generate, which makes the first part of this ability worse. But the second part of actually refreshing Old Gods abilities, if we see more Old Gods in the future, this is a really powerful ability to look out for. But until we see more Old God support, I think this is going to be just a alright ability overall. His final ability is Corrupt Viscera, which is a ability at level 5 with a speed of 2 and a cooldown of 5. Destroy your minions for each, deal damage equal to their health to all enemies, and restore 10 health to this merc. So this is a really cool ability. It does show that we are going to get some abilities that have a much longer cooldown, and could be a really cool thing to try to build around, and could be a really cool ability to build around, especially because there are a bunch of token generating mercenaries currently in Hearthstone. I could see this being easily comboed with Lady Andacondra, where we keep buffing up her Cobra to absurd levels and explode our enemy's team, where we can just wipe everything all at once. It's kind of similar to what you can do with Onyxia if you plan it correctly. And I really do want to use Nzoth in some type of build. I'm really looking forward to this mercenary. His first equipment is Evolving Might, which at level 4, spawn of Nzoth gains the Death Rattle, give a random friendly character +5/+5, which is a decent enough ability if we were using a token generating team, as this could even work in some type of Murloc based team, though it doesn't solve the issue Murloc currently has where you don't have any protectors. But it does serve as a way to buff up your Murlocs if you want to do something like that. The next equipment is Corrupted Neurons, which causes Gift of Nzoth to also give the minion +8 health. Decent enough ability. I don't know how much this is actually going to matter, but it's cool to actually see. And finally, Eternal Torment, which is at level 4 at the start of each turn, deal 4 damage to all enemies. This is a really funny little ability to actually have, especially with fatigue being brought into the game. This is just passive damage that you can actually do to your opponent without actually having to worry about Trigor, and probably going to be the equipment that you actually use with Nzoth. Overall, I think Nzoth is going to be a really fun mercenary to build around, and going to be a really interesting mercenary if he does become meta relevant, because a lot of the mirror matches are going to be really hilarious to actually try to be the better player and are going to take a lot of skill. This is one of those mercenaries that I'm so looking forward to actually using. I can't wait to actually use him. I might be a little bit biased. I do love Nzoth as a character, and I really do hope we see additional Old Gods in the future. And now for the individual mercenary reworks, the first one being Blink Fox, and his Mana Blink ability being changed because of the reworked to the refresh ability. Instead of just refreshing all your characters' abilities, it's only going to refresh ones that have a 5 cooldown or less. This doesn't actually matter with any of the current mercenaries in the game, but it could matter if we do see some of the other Old Gods in the future with a very long cooldown, and it also does still make the next ability 5 speed faster. This is probably a decent enough change. It's to prevent some future issues with Blink Fox, but Blink Fox doesn't see too much play as it currently stands, and I don't think this was necessary, at least right now. Arcane Fling is going to deal 13 damage to an enemy, and if it hasn't acted, deal 18 damage instead. Just buffs up the base damage of Arcane Fling. A decent enough change. Probably won't change the overall use of Blink Fox in any team, but you never know. Arcane Fang is also getting buffed up to increase the damage of Arcane Fling by 7 instead of 5. A decent enough change. It does make it really annoying that Gul'dan hasn't been buffed in any way. It's really weird that they seem to be really afraid of making Gul'dan into a better mercenary. The next change we're seeing is to Anduin's equipment, Robes of Rejuvenation, which makes it where this again is to reflect the changes to the keyword refresh, and it only makes Holy Word Salvation refresh up 2 instead of just refresh instantly, With Captain Galvanger, this could mean that you won't instantly get Holy Word Salvation back, but outside of that, it shouldn't matter too much. And finally, the next change is to a bounty treasure, the one that refreshes the Merc's abilities to have a refresh of 20 instead of just refreshing anything. This isn't probably going to matter in the end. And finally, the last set of changes we're actually seeing is a added spell school to a lot of abilities that should have had a spell school in the first place but didn't have it, especially to those of a Fel-based team, so maybe demons will actually see some play. The first one being Blitzing Legion, which is gaining a Fel school. So is Terror Charge, Howl of Terror, thus making both Manaroth and Rathorian actually better in a Fel-based team. Divine Assault, Tyrion's ability, is gaining a Holy Spell school. Helm of Domination is gaining frost damage, and Chilling Amulet is gaining frost damage. Honestly, out of all these changes, the ones that I think will matter the most is Terror Charge or Howl of Terror for Manaroth, as he was already a good mercenary in a Fel-based team, especially if you were going for pure demons, and this will just make him a lot better in that type of team where you can actually have a lot more synergy between the other mercenaries you actually have. And the change to Helm of Domination is actually probably a really good change overall too. This does mean it actually scales with frost damage, which might be a little bit frightening and actually bring Lich King back into the meta game. It really just depends. I do think Chilling Amulet is going to be annoying just because of how the game registers additional damage when a mercenary dies and when they don't, because it's going to be a little bit frustrating to actually see Frost actually getting a buff. It's really disappointing to me that we're actually not seeing any changes to Trigor. Buffing up Trigor in the last patch was a huge mistake. It just killed off a bunch of possible teams, though I do hope, because of some of the other changes that have been made in this update, that Trigor might fall out of favor, but I very much doubt it. And finally, we're getting a new zone and a new bounty, which is the Dark Shore zone, which will be added to the bounty board with one bounty in it, which will probably honestly be used for the new Nzoth event. Alright, so those were the updates actually in the patch for Mercenaries as a game mode, and overall I'm really happy with seeing a lot of these changes, though I wish they did a little bit more for some of the really problematic Mercenaries as it currently stands, but I get where they're coming from. They don't want to change too much to be worse, because there's no way for them to actually compensate players for the time investment they made with certain mercenaries. It's much easier to label things when they're nerfing them as reworks or buffs than it is to actually say we straight out nerfed a mercenary because he was problematic, or just introducing a new mercenary to try to counter problematic mercenaries. With that being said, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, bye bye.